Is your favorite fighter overrated, underrated, or properly rated? We're going to be going through a list of some UFC fighters to figure that out. Keep in mind, this is me going off of what I think the general consensus is of each fighter and how they're rated. So starting with Alex Pereira, the thing about Alex Pereira is I think most people acknowledge that Alex Pereira probably is not going to beat John Jones, is probably not going to beat Tom Aspinall. So I'm putting him at properly rated because I think most people kind of know what Alex Pereira is. But then again, like I think a lot of people underrate Alex Pereira's grappling. And the thing people will say about Alex Pereira's grappling, oh, Adesanya took him down in the first fight. If Adesanya takes you down, then your wrestling's trash. And I agree with that. If Adesanya can take you down easily, it's a problem. And I'm not saying Alex Pereira's wrestling and grappling is good. I'm not trying to make excuses for Alex Pereira, but what I will say about the Adesanya takedown is that this dude had a title shot in the UFC 1 year after making it to the UFC. He debuted in Madison Square Garden in November of 2021 and had a title shot against Adesanya in the same venue a year later. And then he's fighting Adesanya, who you just don't expect to take you down. So yeah, I get it. You know, he got taken down by Adesanya, but since then it's been like 3 years and he's training with one of the best grapplers in the light heavyweight division of all time, Glover Teixeira. So I don't think he's necessarily a scrub anymore on the ground. So there are certain aspects about him that are kind of underrated, but I think overall he's pretty properly rated. With the striking, nobody really underrates his striking. I mean, it's Alex Pereira striking. The only person who I think could beat Alex Pereira in the striking at 205 is probably Tom Aspinall. You know, because I think Tom Aspinall actually probably knocks Pereira out if they fought. Just look at the Khalil Rountree fight. Just imagine Khalil Rountree being a 6'5" heavyweight with more power and more range. You know, I think a lot of people would be surprised. But I have Alex Pereira at properly rated. On to Khamzat Chimaev. I think a lot of you guys aren't going to like this one. I think a lot of people who watch these videos are Khamzat fans. A lot of you guys are Khamzat fans. But I'm going to say he's a little bit overrated. And the main reason I think he's overrated is I think everybody expects this dude to just dominate everybody, to run through DDP, to run through any contender. And I agree with, like, I think he's going to beat Dricus du Plessis. I think he's going to become champion. But we've seen him struggle in fights. And just to, like, see all that and completely disregard the struggles and problems he's had in his fights and think that he's going to run through everybody is a little bit overrating him, because we've seen him struggle, you know, on the feet. And if somebody is able to stuff a takedown of Khamzat Chimaev, I think you're going to see Khamzat Chimaev be a lot more of a normal looking fighter and not this unbeatable monster. So I think for those reasons, he's kind of overrated, even though he's still one of the best fighters. I think, you know, people think he's just unbeatable and nobody's unbeatable. So I have Khamzat as slightly overrated. Now we have DDP, the middleweight champion. And I'm saying he's underrated. I think DDP's very underrated. And it's mostly because of how he fights. People criticize his technique, the way he looks when he fights. But if it works, it works. And at the end of the day, like, most people criticizing his fight style, like, we're not professional fighters. And yes, you can clearly see he doesn't have the best technique, but it's an MMA fight. Like, just because you don't have crisp boxing combinations doesn't mean that you're not a good striker. He has effective striking. He has great pressure. I think people don't acknowledge the pressure that he has. And I think that's the reason why he really wins fights, is he's not much of a skill guy as he is a physicality guy. He's kind of more durable than anybody in the division. He has better pressure and can kind of break people. The only other person who I see breaking people like that in the middleweight division is Sean Strickland. And he has solid grappling. He's pretty well-rounded. I think people underrate him, you know, and think he's going to get mauled by Khamzat. I think Khamzat is going to beat Dricus du Plessis, but I think that, you know, it's not going to be as much of a walkover as Robert Whittaker was. I think DDP and Robert Whittaker are two different animals when it comes to surviving against a guy like Khamzat Chimaev. I think DDP's a lot bigger, a lot more solid. I don't think he's going to get taken down and choked in the first round. And if he does, I think it's going to be a lot harder than Robert Whittaker with his little baby gums. Okay, his little baby teeth. Next up is Islam Makhachev, and I think Islam Makhachev is just a tad bit overrated. Just a tad bit. I know people aren't going to like that, but people do overrate Islam Makhachev a little bit in his striking. I think Islam Makhachev's striking is kind of overrated. A lot of people talk like Islam Makhachev is one of the best strikers in the UFC, and I just don't agree with that. I get it. He outstruck Dustin Poirier, who's one of the best strikers, but you have to account it's an MMA fight. And pure striking is different than just like striking in an MMA fight. We all know about the threat of the takedown. And if Dustin Poirier is worried about the takedown the whole time, I think it makes the striking look a lot different. If Dustin Poirier knew that Islam Makhachev couldn't take him down, I think it would have been a lot more in favor of Dustin Poirier in that striking match. And we've seen Islam Makhachev kind of struggle in the grappling as well. I know a lot of people talk like Islam Makhachev is the greatest lightweight of all time, but if you compare his grappling to Khabib, Khabib did not struggle taking Dustin Poirier down. Islam Makhachev did a little bit. So he shows weaknesses, and people like to play like he's just this unbeatable next level guy, but he does have weaknesses like everybody else. And I think for that reason, he's kind of slightly overrated. I don't think he's grossly overrated like some other people I have on this list, because he's literally pound for pound number one. You cannot be that overrated if you're pound for pound number one. But onto Ilia Topuria, I have this guy at properly rated. And I think the wide consensus on Ilia Topuria is that he's just a super solid fighter, a very well-rounded fighter. The only criticism people say of Ilia Topuria, in his fighting at least, is that his grappling has kind of not been tested, or his grappling isn't as good, and that's kind of the weakness of his game. And I would kind of agree with that. He's struggled a little bit. But if you count struggling getting taken down a couple times by good grapplers in the featherweight division, like Bryce Mitchell, that kind of says a lot about the fighter that you're criticizing and how good he is. Ilia Topuria is that good that you're criticizing him getting taken down by Bryce Mitchell, who I know people like to clown Bryce Mitchell, but he is a damn good wrestler. And that's one of the best parts of his game is his jiu-jitsu and his wrestling, his grappling overall. I think people, properly rate Ilia Topuria. There's some dudes out there that think Ilia Topuria is just going to smoke Islam Makhachev. I think Ilia Topuria could beat Islam Makhachev. I don't think he just goes out there and smokes him. I think it's a really close fight. I think Islam Makhachev has a way better chance to win. But then there's some other people who think Ilia Topuria is just going to get completely mauled round one by Islam Makhachev. That's not going to happen. I seriously highly doubt that Ilia Topuria would get finished on the ground by Islam Makhachev in one round. I just don't think that's the case. But after the Max Holloway performance, before the Max Holloway performance, people were underrating the fuck out of Ilia Topuria. They thought the whole Volk win was a fluke. I knew he would beat Max Holloway, and after he did, because I didn't overrate him, after he did, it kind of shut people up about Ilia Topuria being some lucky, getting a lucky knockout against Volk. Now the people who didn't know how good Ilia Topuria's striking is. He knocked out Max Holloway, a dude who'd never been knocked out before. I think he's properly rated. Okay, Merab's up next. And I think Merab is underrated, even after the Umar fight. And I was a person who underrated Merab. I'll be the first person to say it. Okay, if you guys watch my older videos, I kind of shit on Merab a little bit. I understand he's a great fighter, but I just thought that Umar would have beaten him. And I kind of underrated Merab's, not only his striking, because his striking was kind of decent. He didn't look horrible on the striking. And I also underestimated his cardio. I always knew his cardio was good, but just seeing him fight against Umar, Merab's cardio is like none other. Max Holloway and Colby Covington and Tony Ferguson are guys who are known for their cardio, but you can kind of see why they don't get tired in fights. It's because they're throwing softer punches. They're not throwing like McGregor heaters, straight up just bombs through their left hand. They're not exploding super fast. They're not throwing as hard of punches, and they're throwing more of them. You can kind of see why they're not getting tired. They have a little bit different of a strategy. But when you saw Merab out there, he was literally getting in exchanges with Umar Nurmagomedov and throwing hooks like fucking Josh Emmett, dude. He was literally throwing the hardest hooks he possibly could. And he was grappling super hard. He looks like super explosive, but he just doesn't get tired. And I think people still underrate him even after the Umar fight, even after he proved that he's the best bantamweight in the world. Some people aren't even willing to say that Merab is the GOAT bantamweight. I think that says kind of how underrated Merab is. There's people out there that think Petr Yan has a chance, and I'm one of the biggest Petr Yan fans. I don't think Petr Yan has a chance of beating Merab Dvalishvili. I kind of don't really think O'Malley even has a chance of beating him. I don't really see anybody at 35 right now that could beat Merab. I think, Corey Sandhagen versus Merab would be interesting, but I don't know if, anybody can beat Merab right now. So I'm going to put him as underrated because I still think people aren't giving Merab the respect he deserves, including me before the Umar fight. On to Alessandro Pantoja. This dude's underrated too. People kind of just don't acknowledge him. I don't see people talking about Pantoja. And I get it, he's a flyweight. He doesn't have that entertaining of fights. I mean, there's not many contenders, but the contenders that are in his division, he has beat all of them. This guy could get a super fight, and he would probably be one of the most deserving for it. The only argument against it is just he's not a big star. He hasn't beaten big names because the flyweight division doesn't have big names. But all that he's done, the title defenses he has, the amount he's been on top is better than anyone in the flyweight division other than Demetrius Johnson for the most part. And people don't really talk about it. All right, Belal Muhammad. Belal Muhammad is underrated as fuck. And I don't know if it's because people just hate him, like forced hate. I don't know why people hate Belal Muhammad as much as they do. He's not even that boring of a fighter. He's really not. Like, his fight against Leon Edwards wasn't that boring. I kind of enjoyed it. Like, I know it was more of a thing to, like, it was enjoyable during the fight, like while it was live. Maybe if I watched it back, I'd be kind of bored. But this dude, like, is really fucking good. The performance he put against Leon Edwards was like if George St. Pierre came back and had to fight Leon Edwards. Like, that's the way I saw it. My first thought with the Belal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards was, this is a George St. Pierre performance. And I think Belal Muhammad's going to beat Shavkat. I really do. I think people think that Shavkat's going to walk through Belal Muhammad. That's not the case. I think Belal Muhammad is an insane wrestler. He has insane cardio, and he's a problem at welterweight. I think him versus Islam Makhachev, I honestly think Belal might win against Islam Makhachev. And I don't think a lot of people agree with that. And I don't think people think Belal is as good as he is, but he is. So I think he's very underrated in my opinion. On to Jon Jones. Jon Jones is overrated as fuck, dude. And I think mostly the reason he's overrated is because he has such a casual fan base that they think everything he does is like next level. Anything Jon Jones does, people just think is way better than it is. Like, that win against Stipe was like, literally, I don't even want to talk about it. Like, that win against Stipe means nothing. That did not prove Jones was the best in the world. Stipe was a fucking retired old man. It showed that Jones is extremely hittable on the feet and his boxing is washed. And I think people act like Jon Jones is this just next level MMA fighter. Like, nobody compares to him. When I saw him in the cage, he did not look as good as Islam Makhachev. He didn't look as good as Ilia Topuria. I don't get blown away by Jon Jones when I saw him in his fight against Stipe. I just didn't. You know, this guy's losing to Dominic Reyes. And this isn't like, I'm not trying to just hate on Jon Jones. I understand he's like the greatest of all time. But currently, I think people think that Jon Jones is way better than he is. And that, you know, a lot of people think that Jones is just going to steamroll Aspinall. I think that's fucking insane. I highly doubt Jon Jones is going to steamroll Aspinall. I think Aspinall, if anything, would steamroll Jon Jones. So yeah, I think Jon Jones is completely overrated. You know, and it's kind of because like people are just like told to think that Jon Jones is just this like next level fighter, and he's really not. He's as good as the best pound for pound fighters right now. You know, I think Islam Makhachev, all these top pound for pound guys are more impressive than Jon Jones. Next up, we have Tom Aspinall. And I'm going to say Tom Aspinall's properly rated. You know, he's had great performances, but the performances he's had are heavyweight fighters. He's had some good performances, like the one against Curtis Blades and Sergey Pavlovich. Those were good performances because those were literally like the top heavyweight contenders. And he just flatlined those guys in minutes, literally minutes. I don't see crazy opinions about Tom Aspinall. You know, I think he's properly rated. People kind of know what Tom Aspinall's about, how good he is. You know, what he's done. So I think he's properly rated. On to Shavkat Rakhmonov. This dude is overrated, especially after the Ian Gary performance. And people think that, you know, Shavkat Rakhmonov is just going to go out there and beat Belal Muhammad. That fight is extremely close. I don't even know what the odds are going to be on that fight, but Shavkat Rakhmonov is not this next level grappler. He's not even this next level striker. The main thing that's good about Shavkat is just he's durable and he has decent power and he's got good pressure. People think that this guy's like going to be some dominant champion. He's not. Okay, and he was especially overrated before the Ian Gary fight. I thought the Ian Gary fight was going to be close. I predicted it to be a hard-fought 5 rounds. Shavkat pulls it out at the end, which he did. But I think a lot of people thought that he was just going to kill Ian Gary. That's not the case. I don't think he's going to dominate any top welterweight. And I think he loses against Belal Muhammad. On to Peyton Talbott. I'm throwing Peyton Talbott in here, even though he's kind of just like not as relevant as the rest of these guys. Peyton Talbott is overrated as fuck, dude. And I was saying this before the fight. I was literally saying this, but even though I picked him against Ronnie Barcelos, I was saying he was overrated because I knew if he got to the top level, which he's not even at the top level, Ronnie Barcelos is not a top level fighter. His grappling is not able to compete with these other guys. And the reason I said that is because the way he fights so upright like Sean Strickland. This dude is just prone to getting taken down. And he did get taken down. He's actually a lot worse on the ground than I thought. I was kind of overrating him too, even though I thought that he was overrated. He got fraud checked. That was a fraud check. Okay, I know a lot of people like to throw out the word fraud check. That's a fraud check if I've ever seen one in the UFC. Minus 1,200 my ass. Now we got Adesanya. And Adesanya, you know, I flip-flop back and forth between Adesanya. Like, I used to think he was overrated as fuck. But after he's lost twice against DDP and Strickland, I think people are rating him better. They kind of know the level of Adesanya. And I think he's properly rated. I think this guy looked actually pretty decent against DDP. You know, the Strickland, he looked really bad. And he kind of redeemed himself a little bit against the DDP. He still lost because ultimately I think it was the cardio and the grappling of DDP. But let's not get it twisted. He outstruck DDP. He landed way cleaner body shots. He just had cleaner combination. And I guess it depends what happens with his fight coming up next week. But right now, I think he's properly rated. I think he's still one of the best contenders in the middleweight division right now. I don't think he's up there with, you know, I don't think he would beat Sean Strickland. I don't think he beats Khamzat Chimaev, but I think he beats Whitaker. You know, I think he's around, you know, the top contenders, but I don't think he's championship level anymore. So I think he's properly rated. I think a lot of people can agree with that. After losing twice against two champions, I think people kind of know he's more like high contender level right now. I don't know if a lot of people think that he can get the title back. I don't think so either. So I think he's properly rated. Onto Magomed Ankalaev. I think Ankalaev is overrated. I really do. I think people think that he's gonna just run through Alex Pereira. Not everybody. A lot of people think that Pereira is gonna run through Ankalaev, but there's a big group of people that think, you know, Ankalaev is just gonna take down Pereira and beat him on the ground. People think that Ankalaev's wrestling is just like amazing, probably mostly because of his last name, but Ankalaev, he might not even be that much better of a grappler than Pereira. And I know that's crazy to say because Magomed does train grappling and we've seen him use it against Jan Blachowicz, but this dude's not a finisher on the ground. He held Blachowicz down, but he just laid there. Like he literally just laid there. And if you're going to hold Pereira down and lay on top of him, that's not going to win you the fight. You're not going to do that round after round without getting caught by Pereira on the stand-up before you take him down for 5 rounds. You're just not going to win that way. And I don't think Ankalaev's even going to try to fight that way. I think he's going to try to strike with Pereira. And I don't think anybody can strike with Pereira other than Tom Aspinall at 205 and up. So that's what I think about Ankalaev. I don't think that he's as good as people think he is. People's like, oh, his boxing is great. He can catch Pereira. You know, I think he will probably land on Pereira. I mean, it's a fight. But I don't think he's going to put out Pereira. I don't think he's going to outstrike him over several rounds. I don't think he's going to hold him down for several rounds. I think Pereira is going to beat him just like everybody else at 205. And I think people are overrating him a little bit. All right, next up we got Charles Oliveira. This one I'm not going to spend too long on. I think that he's kind of properly to overrated. I don't think he has any chance of being a champion, and there's some people who think he does, but he is a top contender. So I think most people's opinions about him is kind of that, but there are some people that do think he's going to be like champion again and that he could beat Islam Makhachev. I don't think there's a chance in fucking hell that he beats Islam Makhachev. So I'm going to put him at slightly overrated, but onto Alexander Volkanovski. And I think Alexander Volkanovski is underrated, even though I think he's going to get knocked the fuck out against Ilia Topuria. I still think people are underrating him because the narrative around Volkanovski, from what I've seen, is that he's kind of just washed now. He's going to go on a losing streak. And the only reason I think he's going on a losing streak is because he's facing literally the pound for pound 1 and 2. He's losing to Islam Makhachev, who's pound for pound number 1, and he's losing to Ilia Topuria, who I think is pound for pound number 2. So going on a losing streak against literally the best, like guys that are going to be the greatest of all time, is not like you being washed. It's just you not being the second or first best in the world. So I don't think like Alexander Volkanovski is going to start, you know, losing to guys like Diego Lopez. I don't think he's going to start, you know, I don't think maybe he loses to Movsar Evelev. I don't think he loses to like any contenders other than possibly Evelev, you know, and I'm not on the bandwagon of Volk being washed. I don't think he's washed yet. So that's why I think he's kind of underrated. Okay, Petr Yan's next up. Petr Yan is properly rated. We kind of all know Petr Yan's level. And he's arguably one of the best bantamweights of all time. A lot of people think that he got robbed against Sean O'Malley. I think he did, you know, and I think it's a shame that Petr Yan isn't champion because he doesn't really, you know, have as many opportunities to fight in 5-round fights, which is where Petr Yan shines, in my opinion. Unless he's fighting a guy like Merab, I think he shines in 5-rounders. And I think that's the reason he got robbed against Sean O'Malley, because if that went 5 rounds, I'm taking Petr Yan all day to beat Sean O'Malley. You know, but he's properly rated. We all know how fucking skilled he is. He's one of the most skilled fighters of all time. Next up, we have Sean O'Malley, though. And the thing I will say about Sean O'Malley is that he's considerably worse, in my opinion, fighting 5 rounds as opposed to 3. The advantage of Sean O'Malley when he's fighting in 3-rounders is way more because he doesn't really have to deal with getting tired against guys like Merab and guys like Petr Yan who mix up the fighting. And when Sean O'Malley can just spend all his energy for at least 2 rounds on the feet striking, no one's going to really be able to compete with him. But if he's in main events, he's going to struggle, in my opinion, against guys like Corey Sandhagen. I think he would lose to Corey Sandhagen in a 5-rounder lose to Petr in a 5-rounder, lose to Merab in a 5-rounder, lose to Umar in a 5-rounder. I think he's a little bit overrated, you know, because his title run, yeah, he knocked out Aljamain Sterling. That was a good win. I'll give it to him. But then he fought Chito Vera, and like, yeah, it was a good performance, but it's Chito Vera. You know, that title shot shouldn't have never happened. Like that was not a warranted title shot by Marlon Vera. So his legacy was kind of getting overrated for a little bit. People were saying that he could beat fucking Ilia Topuria. Like, people were saying they wanted the super fight between Ilia Topuria and Sean O'Malley if he beat Merab. That fight would be brutal. Ilia Topuria would break Sean O'Malley in half. But on to Movsar Evelev. I think Movsar is properly rated. You know, Movsar against Aljamain Sterling, he honestly looked pretty good. On the feet, he looked pretty decent. He looked good enough to where, like, if his game plan is wrestling, he can kind of survive a little bit against really good strikers. Maybe not Ilia Topuria, because maybe he doesn't even get a takedown against Ilia Topuria. But I think a lot of people see him as, like, one of the best contenders at featherweight. No one really thinks this dude's gonna, like, just fucking no diff Ilia Topuria, or like no one thinks he's a fraud or anything. No one has like any like crazy perceptions on Movsar Evelev. I think he's pretty properly rated. Khalil Rountree. This guy I think is actually kind of overrated. And I know he had a great, impressive performance against Alex Pereira. We all know the performance was great. But styles make fights. And like, I think he loses to a lot of light heavyweight contenders. You know, he was number 8 for a reason. I don't think, you know, I don't want to make excuses for Alex Pereira. Let's remember, people love to say that Islam Makhachev was on antibiotics during his fight. And that's why he looked slower against Poirier and all this shit. But people kind of forget that Alex Pereira was literally on his 2nd round of antibiotics in his fight against Khalil Rountree. And I think that actually played a big part, especially them being at elevation. If they rematched, Alex Pereira might put him out early like he does these other contenders. You know, and I think it was more of a great performance at the time from Khalil Rountree, and I don't know if he necessarily does that again, or if he does that to every other contender. I think Yuri probably beats Khalil Rountree. I think Jamal Hill probably honestly loses to Khalil Rountree, but I think Rakic could beat Rountree. I think Ankalaev beats Rountree. I don't think he's like the number 1 light heavyweight other than Alex Pereira. And I think a lot of people think that after the performance Khalil Rountree put on, because he was more dominant than Yuri, he was more dominant than Jamal Hill, but I just don't see it that way. I see it more of like just the styles and the circumstances of the fight. Dustin Poirier's next. He's properly rated. We kind of all know Dustin Poirier's skill level. He's fought so many times, you can't really get a big misconception about him because we've seen him against basically everybody. I think he's properly rated. We all know he's one of the best lightweights, you know, one of the best strikers at lightweight. So I think he's properly rated. Last person we have on this list is Justin Gaethje, and I think Justin Gaethje's overrated. I think he's like Chandler level, and people think that he's better than that, but no, I don't think he's that good. You know, I think he's just like some brawler, you know, especially as of late. Like he had some great performances. He's really hot and cold. Sometimes he'll have a great performance. Sometimes he'll just look like utter shit. And lately he's been looking like utter shit. And I get it. He's fighting Max Holloway, some of the greatest fighters. He's not at the level of Poirier. Even though he beat Poirier, like that's the thing about Gaethje. Like he's so shit sometimes, but then he's head kicking Poirier. You know what I mean? Like he's getting rocked by Chandler and having some crazy brawl. And then he just finishes Poirier way better than fucking Makhachev. You know what I mean? He beats the brakes off of Ferguson, and then he gets embarrassed by Oliveira in the first round. Like, it's hard to gauge where Justin Gaethje is, but I think he's slightly overrated because, you know, when a guy has hot and cold performances like Justin Gaethje has, it's not a good thing. But yeah, I think he's kind of overrated. Let me know what you guys think about these fighters. Do you think any of them are overrated when they should be underrated or properly rated? Let me know what you guys think about this. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.